Okay. Okay, we'll see. Don't put it in the chat if you're closed, because I will not be going back and checking that. Either post it, email me, or text it. Okay? Please do not put it in the chat. So $20 for your dues. I need to know when you're closed. The last announcement that I want to mention, and I don't know how many of you guys saw it, but I was at Child Care Aware today, and they're doing a giveaway, a lunch giveaway. Now, they won't send you a lunch for your children because, of course, it has to be CACFP credible, but they will send it to you, your spouse, your staff, whoever. And all you have to do is go on. I actually posted it on our site, but you'll have to go into the original post and comment, like, and share the post. If you want 2 entries for a chance, if you'll take a picture of you with your children, or I shouldn't say you with your children, a picture of you, and or it doesn't have to be you either. I see people going, no. They said the picture can be something about what Child Care Aware has done for you. So like, Sue, can I share what you did?
Yep, sure.
She took a picture of her children.
We're practicing.
Oh, you're practicing. Okay. Her children in the leaves next to the essential workers sign. Or if you got one of their grants and you spent money, the money on something, if you wanted to put, you know, a picture of that and then tag them in it. Okay.
You're frozen, Tammy.
I'm frozen.
You were. Now you're not.
Do I need to start singing? Okay.
Ooh, did you not beat that thing yet? You've been working on that for a week.
Oh,
I've done it a couple of times this evening. I'm just trying to work a new move.
I'm not complaining. I could work on it all year and not.
Am I going to have to mute those two? Okay. The last comment I want to make is Child Care Aware still has cleaning supplies. I cannot pick up anymore just because I'm telling you guys, if I make it through the holidays, it's going to be a miracle. But if you guys want to go buy and pick them up yourself, they've still got supplies. So you can message Michelle Wynn and she would be glad to set up a time that works for you guys. I know she would. Okay. It is 7:05.
Tammy,
Joe, anybody after this cannot go in our early bird drawing. Okay. Or not early bird, on time drawing. And Debbie Mays, if you'll mute everybody for me. Okay. We're going to get started, because we've got a
No. Okay.
No, I think
Me?
I'm not muted.
Am I
Okay.
unmuted? Did you mute me, Debbie? Gosh,
Yes, she did.
I gave her some power, didn't I, guys? If she starts muting me, will you guys tell me? Because I have a feeling she might be having fun with this. Okay, we're going to get started. We've got a lot to cover today. Once again, I just want to make sure that you've got your PDR number in the chat. You guys that have your spouses sitting with you or your helpers sitting with you, make sure both names are in the chat, please, because we've got to make sure we get credit for everybody. Make sure that you put the people that you love or yourself, if you are a veteran, in the chat. I just want to say thank you for the service. Those are the people in my family right there that have been in the service. So I am very, very respectful of that. Okay, we're going to be talking about whole grains today, and we are going to talk about how to identify whole grains, and we are also going to be talking about the ounce equivalents. Just like when we talked about it before, this is not new. This is just review once again. The reason that whole grains are so important to the CACFP is because so many Americans, including children, have too much refined grains. Refined grains are very, very high in sugar. They have almost twice the amount that they need, but they don't get enough whole grains. Whole grains have got the vitamins, the minerals, the fiber, and other nutrients that help us stay healthy and strong. So they need those. Because whole grains are so healthy, the CACFP requires that at least 1 grain a day that we serve at a meal or at a snack is a whole grain. In the CACFP, a whole grain means that at least half of the grain ingredients in the food are whole grain, and all of the remaining ingredients in the food are either enriched, bran, or germ. Remember, there is no whole grain requirement for infants. You do not have to keep up with infants with whole grains. Here's a list of a lot of the common whole grain foods that you'll see that you serve. If you serve any of these, you're guaranteed that you can count the serving as the whole grain component for the day. A lot of you serve brown rice instead of white enriched rice. That's a great choice. Whole wheat, any kind of whole wheat bread, bun, roll, anything that says graham is also a whole grain. The pastas, crackers, there's just so many. This is not an exhaustive list, but these are a lot of the common ones. Now, I kind of want to see, and I'm going to have to see if I can go back and forth. We'll see. I want to see how much you guys know right off the bat. Your child care center serves the same group of children for the entire day. Today you serve enriched toast at breakfast, brown rice at lunch, and yogurt and fruit for snack. If you have served that, I want to know if you have fulfilled your whole grain requirement for the CACFP for the day. Mark yes or no. I'll give you about 15 to 20 seconds to see if you have done that.
Could you read that again?
If you've served enriched bread for breakfast, brown rice for lunch, and yogurt and fruit for snack. Have you fulfilled your whole grain requirement for the day? Let's see the results. I'm going to end polling. Share the results. Can you guys see it? Yes or no?
Yes.
Okay, good. Good. And as you can see, the majority said yes. So let's go back and see if you are correct. Whoops. Yes, it does meet the whole grain requirement because brown rice, remember, brown rice at lunch is a whole grain.
My results aren't showing.
So we're going to talk about how you decide if a whole grain, if a food is a whole grain rich food. There's 5 different ways to make sure that the food you serve qualifies as a whole grain. Most of you, when I come monitor or when I check your menus, are choosing a whole wheat bread or a whole wheat pasta or a whole wheat whatever. That's perfect. If you're using a whole wheat, then you do not have to worry about checking all these other ways of finding out if something is a whole grain rich. But that limits your choices. So we're going to go through each one individually so we can check it. The next easiest way, other than using a whole grain, a whole wheat, is to find a food and purchase foods that are WIC approved. If you go on and just Google WIC approved whole grains, it'll come up with a whole list. Any of these foods, and it can be any state because WIC is a federal program, so it can be any state. Cereals and brands, any brands matter when you're using the WIC approved list. So like on here, you see it's Kellogg's Corn Flakes. You can't choose Great Value Corn Flakes and assume it is a whole grain rich because these manufacturers have gone to the trouble to prove that their items are whole grain. And so that's why they're on the WIC approved list. So it's very important if you choose to use the WIC list that you choose the brand. Another way, and as we showed you last week, Debbie, are we having trouble with muting? I've got some
Yes,
background noise.
I can't mute everybody. I'm trying to go through to see who's unmuted, but
Okay.
some of the people, it's not letting me mute.
Okay.
Can you try mute all from your end?
I don't see where it's at. I'd have to go back to the thing. I think we've got it now. I don't hear anybody right now.
Okay.
As we saw last week when we were going over the CN labels, if you use a CN label, it's going to identify the grain, and it's going to identify the meat, and it's going to identify the vegetable or fruit component. So if you're using a CN label, check and see if it shows that the food is a whole grain. It will list it. And there's some chicken nuggets out there right now that are a whole grain, that if you serve 5, it's a whole grain rich grain, and it's a meat component. The other way is using the FDA whole grain health claim. There's several different variations to this, like you'll see on the Cheerios. It shows lower cholesterol as part of a heart healthy diet. But the main one that you're going to see is going to say diets rich in whole grain foods and other plant foods and low in saturated fat and cholesterol may help reduce the risk of heart disease. So if it's got that, it has also gone to the extra work to prove to the FDA that it is whole grain rich. You cannot always rely on the front of a label to tell you if it is a whole grain rich food. If you'll notice, these say made with whole grain, white whole grain, 9 grams of whole grain. It does not ensure that it is enough of a whole grain. Remember, you have to have at least 51%. You have to have at least equal or 51% or more of the whole grain to be considered a whole grain rich on the CACFP. So if you can't use the front of the package, what do we use? We use the ingredient label. This is the best way to tell whether a food is a whole grain rich food. Now, the first thing I want to mention, because ever so often I'll say something about an ingredient label, and you guys will send me this nutrition fact label that's got the grams and how many servings. That is not an ingredient label. That is a nutritional fact label. I need you guys to look at this label, the ingredient label. This label goes over just the ingredients that are made up to make this, that are in the food to make up this food. That is the ingredient label. So we are going to use the ingredient label to make sure and find how to check to see if a food is a whole grain rich food on the CACFP. We're going to use something called the rule of 3. If you use the rule of 3, you're going to find a lot more options of grains, whole grains. It's going to tell us to look at the first ingredient. It's going to tell us to simplify the ingredient list. It's going to tell us to look at the first ingredient. It's going to tell us to find the ingredient list, simplify the ingredient list, look at the first ingredient, look at the second grain ingredient, and look at the third grain ingredient. And we're going to go over it, so don't stress about what that means. This is actually in the handout that I emailed to you guys, and you guys actually got a copy of it year before last, I think it was, and we had you put it inside your food program notebook. So if you've lost it, then you need to print off the one that I sent you yesterday. But like I said, the first step is find the ingredient list. As you'll see on here, this one is a bread. So we're going to use the entire ingredient list to decide whether it's a whole grain rich food. This food is a frozen cheese pizza. So when we're talking about whole grain rich, we're going to use only the ingredients that have to do with the crust. Once you have found the ingredient list, the next step, remember, is to simplify the list by taking out the disregarded items, the items that you do not have to decide, you do not have to use. And that list is on this flyer that I sent you. This is just a copy of the flyer. So these are the disregarded items, and there's always a lot of these things. Cornstarch is a huge one that you'll see. Water is a big one that you'll see. Wheat gluten is a big one that you'll see. And then a lot of times you'll see any ingredients that appear after the phrase contains 2% or less. Just mark them out, disregard them. You don't even have to consider them. So once you've simplified the list, you find the first ingredient and see if it's a whole grain. This one is a whole wheat flour. If the first ingredient is a whole grain food, then whole grain ingredient, then we are going to go on to the next step. If it is not a whole grain, if it's an enriched grain, then it is not a whole grain rich food. It's going to have to say one of the whole grain ingredients, which is also listed on your flyer, and I'll be showing it to you here in a later group. So the whole wheat flour is a whole grain food. It is not cereal, so we don't have to worry about it being fortified and stuff. So we're going to go to the next step. The first ingredient is a whole grain food, a whole grain ingredient. So we look for a second grain ingredient. If there's not a second grain ingredient, you can stop right there. Once again, it's a whole grain rich food. But if there is a second ingredient, a second grain ingredient, which in this place, it's called wheat flour, then you're going to have to go on to step 3. You also need to check to make sure if wait a minute, if there is a second grain ingredient, you have to make sure that second grain is either a whole grain, an enriched grain, a bran, or a germ. If it's one of those 4 things, then you are going to go on to step 3. If it is not one of those things, if it is not enriched, if it is not a whole grain, if it is not a bran, and it is not a germ, then it is not a whole grain rich food. So then you would that does not mean it's not credible. Now remember, we're talking about using it as a whole grain rich component. If it is a whole grain, an enriched grain, a bran, or a germ, we go on to step 5. So the first one is a whole grain. The second one is an enriched grain. So now we have to look and see if there's a third grain ingredient. If there's not a third grain ingredient, if there's only those 2 ingredients, then you can stop. It is a whole grain rich food. If there is a third grain component, you have to check once again, is that third grain a whole grain, an enriched grain, a germ, or a bran? If it is, then you have a whole grain rich food. If it is not, you do not have a whole grain rich food. So once again, all we're saying is the first 3 ingredients have to be, the first ingredient's a whole, and the second and the third grain ingredient have to be either a whole grain, an enriched grain, a bran, or a germ. If it's any of those, then you have a whole grain rich food. Once again, and I cannot repeat this enough because there's so many out there. If your first, second, or third ingredient is a non-credible grain, you're serving a non-credible food. You have to make sure and check your label for those non-credible grains. Here is the list of the whole grain ingredients that's in that flyer. And here is a list of the enriched grain ingredients. And here is the list of the non-credible grains or flours. Bran and germ are just exactly what they say, bran and germ. I cannot mention this enough. the non-credible grains. When you guys sent me some of your labels, there were several that were non-credible. And unless you guys were trying to trick me, I had asked for labels that you guys were using for your credible grains and credible whole grains. So I need you guys to go back and look to see if the non-credible grains and flours are on your foods that you are using. I'm going to start really checking them again. I'd kind of slacked off, number one, because of COVID, number two, because you guys had it down so pat. But I think we're getting into the habit of just grabbing again. So you really need to go back to checking the labels. Are you able to tell from this picture if a food is credible on the CACFP whole grain rich component? Okay, good. Thank you guys for shaking your head. I appreciate that, because I'm not gonna take the time to do a poll. You cannot tell from this picture if this is a whole grain rich food, because all it says is whole grain rich. What about this one? Can you tell if this is a whole grain rich food? Yes or no? If a food says that it is I like the shrug. The shrug made me happy. 100% whole wheat or 100% whole grain means 100%. 100% of that food is a whole grain. So if you do see 100% on the front of the label, you can choose that as a whole grain rich and feel secure that it is a whole grain rich food. Now, quickly, let's go through some of these labels. And I know you guys don't have the list of the credible and non-credible, so I'm just going to go through them. I'm not going to make you guys answer, okay? The first ingredient is whole grain wheat. That is a credible whole grain in the whole grain food list. So now you look at the rest of the list to see if there's any other grains. There are no other grains in this label. So that is a whole grain rich food. If the first ingredient is not a whole grain, enriched flour is an enriched flour. It is not a whole grain. And corn is not even a credible grain. So if you are using this label, you're not supposed to be serving it at all. If you're using this label, it is credible, but not as a whole grain rich food. Whole wheat flour is a whole grain rich. So you have to go through and look to see. Remember, wheat gluten doesn't count and contains 2% or less. You don't have to look any further. So you only have one grain there. Perfect. It's a whole grain rich food. Once again, same thing here, whole wheat flour. Here you've got whole grain oats is a whole grain. Cornstarch we don't have to look at. And everything else is just vitamins and minerals. So this, and I believe this is Cheerios, is a whole grain rich food. Whole grain oats, whole grain corn, you don't have to worry about cornstarch. And then you've got some whole grain corn brands. You've got 3 different grains here. They're all whole. This is a whole grain rich food. Enriched wheat flour, even though it says wheat, we get caught up on the word wheat and think it's a whole wheat. This is an enriched wheat, enriched flour. Those are credible. They are not whole grain rich foods. You can use them, you just cannot use them for your component. Now, if they have more than 3 credible grains in them, you don't have to go any further. You don't have to worry about that. Wheat flour is a non-credible grain. Degerminated yellow cornmeal is also a non-credible grain. If you are using Jiffy Pop cornmeal mix, Jiffy, it's not Jiffy Pop, Jiffy Mix cornmeal, you are not using a credible, it doesn't matter if it's whole grain, it's not credible at all. You have to make your own cornmeal, muffins. Now, what about flour blends? Ever so often, you are going to see a group of flour. It's going to say whole grain flour, and then in parentheses, it's going to have a whole bunch of sub ingredients that make up that flour blend. If you have this situation, you don't go 1, 2, 3, 4. This is 1 grain. This flour blend is 1 grain. So you have to look at this one is 1, this one is 2, and this one is 3. So you've got a whole grain as your first ingredient, a flour blend that's got whole grains, graham grain, enriched wheat, which is fine for a second ingredient, enriched corn flour, which is fine for a second ingredient. So that flour blend also meets the qualifications, and then a wheat bran. So this label would be a whole grain rich food. You use the grain blend as a 1 grain. There's quite a few of those too, so be on the lookout for those. Make sure you're not counting the first 3 and not going further. If it's in parentheses, that's 1 grain. Do I always have to check the label? I know goldfish are whole grain, right? Well, in this case it is, because whole wheat flour is a whole grain, and then it's got enriched wheat flour. And so, yeah, it's a whole grain rich food, but oh my goodness, this looks like a goldfish cracker too, and it's enriched wheat flour. You always have to check the ingredient label. It's very important. That's another reason I know sometimes I get the email back after I've sent a deduction for not having the WG saying, but you know, goldfish are whole grains. No, I don't know that the goldfish you're serving are whole grains. You have to put a WG on your menu next to the whole grain food that you are serving for the day, because I don't see your labels. You guys are the only ones that see the labels. Now, we talked real quickly about cereals. Cereals do not use the rule of 3. If the first ingredient is a whole grain and it is enriched, it is a whole grain enriched food. So you don't have to worry with cereals about all the different groups of whole grains or enriched grains and the rule of 3. You just have to make sure the first ingredient is a whole grain, and then it's got the vitamins and minerals that make it an enriched fortified food. And that way it is considered a whole grain rich food. Then there's a ton of cereals that meet whole grain rich. Is my recipe a whole grain rich? I see a lot of you guys that make whole grain homemade muffins, whole grain homemade waffles, whole grain homemade pancakes. The biggest thing is making sure that either equal or more than your grain ingredient is a whole grain. So like in this case, you're using 2 cups of whole wheat flour, 2 cups of enriched flour, and 2.5 cups of oatmeal. So your whole grains, you add those 2 together and you've got 4.5 cups of whole grain ingredients, and you've only got 2 cups of enriched flour. So your menu, your recipe would be a whole grain recipe. If you had 1 cup of whole wheat flour and 2 cups of enriched flour, it's not going to be a whole grain. You would not be able to use it. And remember, your recipes need to be on file for review if you put the word homemade next to a recipe, next to a menu item. just food for thought. Here's some breakfast ideas. I know we can always use new breakfast ideas. Like I said, a lot of the cereals are whole grain. Make sure they meet the sugar limit. That's very important. There's a ton of English muffins out there now. The pancakes and waffles in the frozen food section. Lunch and supper ideas. I've seen a lot of you guys using quinoa recently. Of course, the rices and the tortillas. You can find tortillas like crazy out there, and children love those. And snack ideas, banana, the muffins, Martha White, I think that's the one that I actually showed that said you couldn't tell by the front actually is a whole grain muffin mix. Don't get real excited because I know you guys think it's over. We're going to go into ounce equivalents, but I wanted to find out, and Debbie Jo, if you will unmute yourself, if there are any questions about this section before we go on. I want to see if we can clarify because it's going to get deeper into the ounce equivalents. Did you? Debbie? Yep, you're there.
Remind them of the rules on cornmeal as a whole grain.
Cornmeal and corn mesa. If it just says the word cornmeal or corn mesa, it is now a credible grain. So if you get, now you got to make sure it's cornmeal. There is cornmeal mix that people use to make cornbread. If it's cornmeal mix, it is not necessarily a whole grain. Cornmeal is. Debbie, were there any others? Debbie Jo?
That was it.
Oh, good, good. Well, I'm glad because I kept thinking, geez, I've probably lost everybody by now. Debbie Jo, we've got, let me show them what they're getting. Our on-time person gets a shirt. Where's my camera? There it is. That has this on the front of it, and it's a pretty yellow. So who would that be?
Bobby Fletcher.
Yay! Okay, that's our first giveaway. Everybody take a stretch and a breather. And now we're going to go fast and furious into ounce equivalents. I emailed this worksheet to you also, so you have it, but it was also given to you last year. It was a hard copy that we asked you to put in your food notebook. So hopefully you've got the hard copy. When I discussed it last year, I did not go in depth because number one, we knew they were going to give an extension. Number two, I just quickly wanted to show you guys that I wasn't a bit worried. As horrible as I am at math and all those kind of things, I'm not a bit worried about ounce equivalents because we overserve grains so much. And you're going to see it here in just a minute, how much we actually do. So I'm not worried about it. You guys honestly don't need to change anything. If I see something, I've told you. However, I need you to be aware of how it works and where you can find this information, because if the state happens to visit you starting in October the 1st of 2021, this will be a regulation and they will mention it, and you don't need to go, Tammy never told me about that, because I have, and you know where to find the information. And you can even tell them that Tammy said you overserve grain, that you don't need to worry about it, but you know, here's the information, you know where to find it. Ounce equivalents have nothing to do with whole grain. So get the whole grain out of your head. We're talking about any grain, any credible grain now is switching to ounce equivalents instead of serving sizes. 1 ounce equivalent makes up 16 grams of grain. And that's what they're trying to do, is make sure that children are getting at least 16 grams of grain out of the grains we're giving them. And as you can tell, as you know, Crackers come in all kinds of different sizes. Bread comes in all different kinds of sizes. Pasta comes in all different kinds of sizes. So it is important that we know how to make up 16 grams. 20 cheese crackers, those are the little bitty Cheez-It snack crackers. I promise you, I've seen you guys give close to 40 of those. 12 of the thin wheat crackers, you know, the little thin wheat thins, only 12 of those woven wheat crackers that my grandchildren love, they only need 5 of those. And I give them a Ziploc bag full. So we overfeed grains. Now, I know you can't read this, and I don't expect you to, so don't anybody try, but it is inside the handout that I emailed to you or that you got last year. It's in this handout, and it gives you over 40 common grains that are used and gives you the grain equivalents. And I'm going to show you how to use it. On the far left side of the sheet is the actual food group that you look for alphabetically. It's got bagels, cereal grains, corn muffins, animal crackers. It's got everything listed alphabetically. So you would look for the grain that you're wanting to serve. Then it breaks it up into the age group. And as you can see, this is going to be the age group that you guys use most of the time, other than when you have your after schoolers or right now virtual schoolers. You might have some of these. At breakfast, lunch, and supper and snack, all of them are the same. These are going to be all the same ingredients. Using the grain measuring chart, one second. The directions are at the bottom. That's what I wanted to tell you. It's at the bottom of the front page is the grain measuring chart. So you can always, if you're going to watch as I go through it, but if you're ever like, what did she say? This has got the directions for how to use it. And it's on the first page of that ounce equivalent section that I emailed out or that we gave you last year. The first step that you use to find out how to do an ounce equivalent, how you use this measuring tool, is find whatever food that you're going to use. In this case, let's say popcorn, because we all love popcorn. So there's popcorn right there. Next, you look beside the popcorn to see if it has a list of a weight or a size. If you notice, this pita bread says it has to be at least 56 grams. This pretzel says the pretzel needs to be at least 1 1/4 inches by 1 1/2 inches, but the popcorn doesn't have anything beside it. So you don't have to measure and make sure that your popcorn is the correct size. So since you don't have to measure your popcorn, the actual kernel, to see if it's the correct size, then all you do is look at the age group. For a 1 through 5-year-old, for their grain, they need 1 1/2 cups of popcorn or 14 grams of popcorn to make their grain component for breakfast, lunch, supper, or snack. Let's try a different one that requires the measuring. Let's say the little mini twist pretzels. You check to see that it says that it has to be 1 1/4 inches by 1 1/2 inches. Right there. So on the handout that I emailed you, it actually has this measuring tool on the back of the sheet. Where is my camera? There it is, on the back of the sheet. So you would, if you had a cracker, you could actually just lay your cracker here to see if it fits. If it's a townhouse round, or if it's one of those little mini woven wheat things, you could set it here to make sure it's the correct size. But with the pretzel, you're going to have to actually measure it. If it's at least 1 1/2 inches across and at least 1 1/4, because remember it said it had to be 1 1/4. then it meets, well, I'm just going to use this one. I went on 1 1/4 by 1 1/2. It meets the requirement for the size. So then you would just go over here and find out how many you needed. Now we're talking those little bitty mini pretzels, and all you're supposed to serve them is 7. Yeah, I see everybody's look. Handfuls, right? You can serve them more, but you can serve them the minimum amount and then give them extras. The last one I want to show you is the pita bread. It has to be at least 56 grams. Right there, it tells you the grams for the nutritional fact. So you have to actually look at your nutritional fact label. Remember how I told you to find that label when we were talking about the ingredient list? One pita has at least 57 grams of grain. So it does meet the 1 ounce equivalent. So if it has at least 56 grams, you look at your 1 through 5-year-old and how much do they need? I know you probably can't see that. They need 1/4 of a pita. I know you all give them at least 1/2. All they need is 1/4. So once again, I want to reiterate, you guys overserve grains, which that's fine. You're allowed to, but I don't want you to stress about this ounce equivalent thing. What if you have a serving size? Okay, wait a minute. Pancake, I want to show you something. The pancake needs at least 34 grams. These pancake serving size shows 3 pancakes at 117 grams. So what you would need to do is find out how much each pancake, how many grams each pancake is. So all you do is take the 3 pancakes, divide it into 117 grams. So it's got 39 grams per pancake. So it meets the 35 grams that you're required to have. How much of a pancake do they need? 1/2 a pancake. Nobody gives a child 1/2 a pancake. So you don't need to stress about it. You just have to make sure that it meets the grams. If all that boggled your brain and you're like, I want something much, much easier than this, once again, like I showed you last week on last week's training, the food buying guide mobile app and the online use for the food buying guide has a conversion chart for ounce equivalents. So if you're like, I need to be able to do this, I need to be able to figure this out, but I can't quite figure out this information that you've given me, I encourage you to download the USDA food buying guide either on your computer or on your mobile app. The other comment that I wanted to make is there is a 30-minute, and it's usually actually less than that, training webinar that is put on by Team Nutrition. We've given you guys a lot of Team Nutrition resources before, but they have come up with a bunch of these webinars. The upcoming webinars that they're getting ready to have are crediting single serving packages. So you know how those little bitty snack size packages that you'd like to serve sometimes, but you need to make sure how many are in it. They're going to have one coming up on that using the nutritional fact label in the CACFP. This one's going to be huge, and I will probably, now that we actually have the capabilities of doing Zoom training, after I take this one and get some information from Health and Nutrition, I will be doing a Zoom training for people that would like to come on and do an infant credible food, because for up until recently, until this, we've never been able to use the combination baby foods on the CACFP food program. It had to be a vegetable, it had to be a fruit, and it had to be a nasty meat and it's nasty. They are actually going to make it to where we can credit combination infant baby food. So I will be taking that one and I will be bringing it to you guys, and then serving snack. But they have these recorded, and they have them up on the website. So say, for instance, after you watch this, you're like, I still don't get it. You can go to this CACFP halftime 30 on Thursdays, take the training that tells you how to do ounce equivalents, or tells you how to identify whole grains, or tells you what milk to serve, or any of those kind of things. And it takes you even further than I did, step by step, and has little tests that it gives you to where you can see if you've gotten it. Can you believe it? 10 till. So we have some time for questions. Debbie Mays, can you unmute everybody and let Debbie Jo tell me what is in the chat?
We have a question on popcorn.
Okay.
We can count it as a grain, but it can't be counted in the whole grain rule of 3 and is not credible. So there's some confusion.
Popcorn is a whole grain. Popcorn is a whole grain. So if you serve popcorn and you give them 1.5 cups, if they're 5 and under, then you have served a whole grain component for your daily. A lot of people use their popcorn inside their snack mix, their trail mix. If you're going to use your snack mix or trail mix as a whole grain, you are going to have to make sure that all of your grain ingredients inside your trail mix are whole grain or more whole grain than your credible grains. A lot of people use like Cheerios and popcorn and pretzels. You know, if any of those, if all of those are whole grain, don't use it as your whole grain rich ingredient.
So my question was, the part that was confusing me is when we were looking at the labels, if it said corn or corn flour, you said that means it's not credible at all.
Because it's, yes, because it's on the non-credible grain list. Cornmeal or
But isn't popcorn from corn?
But it's popcorn. I don't know. I don't know. But corn or corn mesa, cornmeal, or if it says, and maybe on popcorn, I'd have to actually look at the label. Maybe it says whole corn, because whole corn is a whole grain. But corn as a grain is not, because of the process. The process is when they used to make it.
Okay, I'll just remember what you said. No, and popcorn.
Just text me from the grocery store. Any other questions? I know this one is probably the hardest as far as not the ounce equivalents. Yes, Debbie Jo?
Popcorn's not to be served for children under 2.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, that is exactly right. It is a choking hazard for children 2 and under. It is a choking hazard. So you do not. Thank you for pointing that out. I'm glad you brought that up.
That was Tracy that pointed that out.
Thank you. Yes, that is a choking hazard. It is not to be served, not even not to be counted, not to be served to a child 2 or under. Thank you for pointing that out.
Where do you buy the CN labeled chicken nuggets?
People have been finding it at Sam's, but it is a luck of the draw. You guys that have had CN labels recently, or I should say, has anybody found CN labels recently in Sam's?
No.
Nope. It was real big before COVID. We actually had several. The only thing I have found recently that has a CN label on it is Jimmy Dean patty sausage. But it is, it's just according to what they decide to use. Now
We have a question about juice. Can it count for 1-year-olds?
Juice Yes, a 1-year-old is a child. So they can be served anything that a child is served. Remember, it has to be 100% fruit or 100% vegetable juice. The only people not to be served juice are infants under 1 year. And remember, if you haven't, I think everybody's watched this now, but you can now serve juice more than 3 times a week, but no more than once a day.
Can we still serve cereal with milk and a juice to drink for breakfast?
Absolutely. The only thing you have to be positive of is that there is the correct serving size of milk poured on top of their cereal. Now, a lot of times what I see, and I think this is excellent, they go ahead and pour the milk, the correct size, in the milk cup, and then they give them a juice cup, and they let the children pour their own milk on top of their cereal. That way, if they don't want that much milk on top of their cereal, they can pour what they want and then have that little bit of milk left to drink. But they do have to have, because ever so often I'll see somebody just go zip, 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 and you're not getting more than maybe 2 ounces of milk inside the cereal bowl. If 4 ounces of milk inside a small cereal bowl is a lot of milk. So make sure you're serving 4 ounces. And as a matter of fact, I've got a giveaway here in a minute that I forgot to grab that'll help you with that.
Hey, Tammy, I have a private question about the food manager certificate. I haven't heard anything about that.
The food manager certificate, I actually got a message today. Let me grab it. I got written because it was going around that they were extending it again, and I did not want to give out the information without something in writing. But the health, this is from the health department. They are extending it until July 1st of 2021. You will have to have your certificate by July 1st, 2021. I cannot say this enough, and you guys that took it, shake your heads or clap or whatever. It is something that you will want to take before the last minute. You do not want to put it off. You want to get a class that you have plenty of time to get the book, read the book, take the class, and take the test. It's not a simple test. So you don't want to wait till the last minute and then have to try to scramble around and do a retest. There's plenty of trainings on right now for that class. If you need one, let me know.
Safe class.
Serve Safe, correct. It's actually called
only homes that are 10 above, right?
Correct. For over 10 that have the health inspection, the over 10 homes health inspection are going to be required to have that certificate starting July 1st of 2021. Any other questions?
Can we go?
Okay, well then real quick, let me go over the announcements one last time, just in case anybody came in late. First off, make sure your name and your PDR number's in the chat box. Number 2, I need your dues by the end of November. $20 mailed in, made out to the NWAFCCA, Northwest Arkansas Family Child Care Association. If you are doing the Cozy Coop fundraiser, you're welcome to combine them into one check, but please go ahead and get those in. Make sure I know when you're closed for the holidays. I need it emailed, text to me, or put on the Facebook chat or a Facebook post that Michelle Mendoza put up. And then the last thing, don't forget about Child Care Aware. They still have cleaning supplies to give out for free. And they also have a giveaway for a lunch, a free lunch for the adults in your care, in your child care facility, not the children, because it's not going to be a credible lunch. but they will they're giving it away. And I posted about it today on the Facebook group. If you're not part of our Facebook group, if you want more information about it, let me know and I'll be glad to forward it to you so that you can be part of that. Any last second questions? Yes? Okay.
Will the food program reimbursements be back to the 10th again?
Ooh, Debbie Jo, I like your face. Can everybody see Debbie Jo's face? Okay, I believe in honesty with you guys because I know you guys know that, number one, the Northwest Arkansas Family Child Care Association has always been based on being transparent to the people that we serve. What happened is during the COVID, they were all working remotely. And we have to be paid an advance. They have to give us our money up front based on what they think our reimbursement's going to be. And then we pay you with that money. And then if they didn't give us enough money, then they'll send us more money later in the month. If they paid us too much money, the next month, they don't give us as much money. So it's always kind of been like, you know, if it's Wednesday and you need your paycheck on Friday and you're out of money, you might ask your friend to advance you some money. That's what they're doing. They're advancing us money. Well, during COVID, they stopped the advancements. And so you guys can thank Debbie Jo that the woman had the foresight to save lots of money over 40 years. So we actually had a little bit of money to use in our savings. And we had a whole bunch of providers that had closed that weren't using the money that we had already accumulated during that time. So we used up that money and we had to make to be able to survive, we had to tell you guys that we were going to slack off on the advance. Last month, they started the advancements back. But I want to make sure that they are not going to yank it because we don't have the savings built up anymore. So I want to go like we have been to make sure that they're not going to close back down and send everybody home and not give us our advance. Because right now you guys are used to it being on the 20th.
The 20th?
Well, it was supposed to start on the 25th this month. But the last 2 months, I've been paying you guys on the 20th. So I'm going to leave it on the 20th for the next several months. If they continue to give us an advancement, we will pull it back to the 10th. But you have to understand that at any moment, they don't have to give us an advancement. They do not have to. If the government shuts down and they quit paying us, that affects y'all's reimbursement. So you have to remember, this is a reimbursement. They do not. I was a provider forever. I know, I depended on the money too. But the federal government tells you it's a reimbursement, that you're not supposed to be depending on this money. Okay? At this moment, I'm going to leave it on the 20th. I'm going to finish up the year on the 20th. We had 2,000 cases in Arkansas today. They could shut us down again at any moment. We have to be prepared for that if they do. If they go back to working remotely, I have to be able to take care of the program so that you guys get paid at all. So that's what we're doing at this point.
I think I'll send the IRS a statement saying they shouldn't rely on
their money. I agree with you, Leon. I agree with you.
Because that's where it's coming from. So I'm saying, hey, you don't want me to expect it. You shouldn't expect it either.
I completely agree. Any last questions? It's 8:02, so I want to be respectful of your time.
No.
Hey, Tammy, I'd like to take one for the team and say that, most food programs in Arkansas that I know of, that I have friends in, have never, ever gotten their money as quickly as we do. When they hear me say that my food program check came in, they're like, how in the world? And then they think theirs are doing it all wrong. So I think we're just very fortunate that for many, many years we've gotten it early.
Exactly. And you guys can once again say your thanks to Debbie Jo for that because she started up and ran an incredible program. So she set it up to happen that way. Okay. Oh, and I will make sure the person gets this. Tina Hayden, you guys that know Tina Hayden know she had one of the most amazing programs, and she used theme boxes. This is a fall Thanksgiving theme box full of books and toys and all kinds of stuff that have anything to do with fall and Thanksgiving.
Also, bring me a hair bow.
That is going to be our next giveaway. Debbie Jo, have you got a name? She muted. I can't see her anymore, Debbie. She's probably drawing. We didn't lose her, did we?
She's muted.
She's muted.
Roberto got it.
Oh, wonderful. I will get that up to you with the next week because you'll get the box. And I apologize that I forgot to grab them. I had a pretty busy day today, but we have a sleeve of disposable cups that have the markings of the serving sizes on them. That's going to be the third giveaway. Who would that be? She's muted again.
Giveaway is Keith Lyon.
Yay! Okay, I've got all those names down. If anybody has any questions, you're welcome to stay on, but anybody else that wants to leave, you're welcome to leave. But Debbie Jo, I'd like to talk to you. And you guys have a great rest of your week.
Oh,
Bye.
Debbie
Bye.
Debbie Jo gets to stay over.
Debbie Jo gets to stay. She's in trouble.
You're just gonna have her clean the erasers, right?
I'm in trouble.
Tammy, you're just gonna have her clean the erasers, right?
That's right. She has to
Just dust
pound
the
the
erasers. Yeah.
erasers.
Yeah.
Oh gosh, do I remember doing that? Woo! That's crazy.
Hey, I am liking all the pictures that everyone's posting of the car.
Aren't they incredible?
Those are so cute.
We actually had a Debbie Mays. Tell her about your offer today. That was pretty cool.
I had a local children's photographer ask, could she buy it or rent it to use in her studio? So I thought, maybe depending on how much she wants to charge.
That's why I told Debbie, I said, there's some weekends that we could probably just not do the switch over as quick.
Give her my days.
Hey,
I was just gonna use it as a donation anyway.
You're
We've
not
got
gonna,
like 8
you're
of
not
those in
gonna
the
do it, Mary. You're not gonna take the picture? You're not gonna take pictures? Because if you're not, I really will use your day for something else. Because I've had a few that have messaged after and I'm like, I can't, I'm sorry, we're booked.
I told you I would just give you a donation.
Well, I knew you were just giving me money, but
We've got
it's
like
cute and all, but my kids are all huge.
yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
Hey, Tammy,
We-
stop recording so that you don't have to take up as much space.
Thank you.
We've got like 8 of those cars in the backyard. Maybe we better get out of the childcare business and go into the car business.
That's right.
no, I don't want to have to do those again. I have to
Leon,
do another one.
Leon.
But they are cute photos.
They are turning out adorable.